Welcome to our webinar on navigating barriers to access higher education, credential evaluation for displaced and refugee students. If you don't know me, my name is Nele Feldman. I am the program lead for the Platform for Education in Emergencies Response, or PEER in short, at the Institute of International Education. Thank you for joining us today for what will be the first webinar in a series of webinars IIE PEER will offer to our members. Our speaker today is Zachary Hologwost, ECE 8 Administrator and Research and Knowledge Management Evaluator. We understand at IIE that the evaluation of foreign credentials is one of the main concerns for a lot of higher education institutions in the United States that are either already working with displaced and refugee students or that are interested in exploring this field of work. So today, during today's webinar, Zach will provide us with a detailed look into the challenges and best practices for foreign credential evaluation, and he will also introduce us to the ECE 8 initiative. For those who are not familiar with IIE PEER, I would like to take the opportunity and provide a brief overview of our initiative before handing it over to Zach. So Zach, if you could just move to the first slide. IIE PEER was launched on March 1st, 2017 in response to the many education emergencies around the world. First and foremost, PEER is an online clearinghouse that enables displaced and refugee students to connect with educational opportunities. The centerpiece of PEER is an opportunity database that allows students to search for scholarships, online learning, and language learning opportunities. IIE PEER fills a critical gap in providing students with reliable, vetted, and updated opportunities designed to help them continue their education. In our first year, we focused on the educational needs of Syrian students, but are currently expanding our scope to include students from other world regions. IIE PEER has three main target groups. As I just mentioned, our first target group is students. PEER is the first website that is devoted to collecting vetted scholarship, online, and language learning opportunities for displaced and refugee students. Students can go on the website and search by opportunity and degree type and the country in which they would like to study. IIE PEER is updated on a daily basis. It is mobile ready, and it was designed for students in low bandwidth areas so we can make sure that they're able to access the website. Next slide. Our second and third target group are universities and organizations working or interested in working with displaced and refugee students. Both organizations and universities that are offering education opportunities for students can sign up on iiepeer.org to have their opportunities featured on the PEER website. Our team is committed to helping your university or organization promote your opportunity on our website through our social media channels, our newsletter, and our peer network. Another really important component of our work is to share resources, knowledge, and best practices with universities and organizations working in the field. There are a variety of initiatives in the United States and around the world that address the important topic of higher education access for displaced and refugee students. We at IIE believe that by working together and sharing our combined knowledge, our work will become more impactful and we will be able to serve more students affected by war and conflict. And that is the reason why we're so happy to have Zach with us today, so we can learn more about credential evaluation for vulnerable student population, as well as the ECE 8 initiative. And by sharing that knowledge, we hope that we will provide your university and organization with some guidance on the credential evaluation portion of this important work. And with that, I'm happy to give it over to Zach.
Okay, thank you, Nela, and happy Friday to everyone. If you're having trouble hearing me, just I think if you just chat, we can figure out anything that's happening. But yeah, thanks for joining us this afternoon or morning, wherever you may be. My name is Zach, and I am, as Nela said in the introduction, I'm the ECE 8 administrator at ECE, as well as a research and knowledge management evaluator. I think I have the longest title at ECE. But for those of you who don't know what ECE is, Educational Credential Evaluators was formed in 1980. We have about 90 people on staff. We're based out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and our main focus has been credential evaluations. We're a member of NACES. We do a lot of training, online training as well as on-site training, and we offer both free and paid resources to institutions for various training things as far as credential evaluations are concerned. I've been at ECE for about 12 years. In June, it'll be 12 years. I've been around for a while. And I was an evaluator. Now I'm a research evaluator. I've been an evaluator for about 7.5 of those 12 years. And I've been the ECE aid administrator now for about 1.5 years, but was working on the development of the initiative before the position existed for about 1 year. And I'll go into more detail about ECE aid later in the presentation. But today what we're going to discuss is a form of this presentation was developed about 2 years ago out of some research that we had conducted at ECE. A lot of things have changed, of course, but many things have stayed the same as well throughout the issue of foreign policy and educational systems and credential evaluations in general. So today we'll discuss a little bit about the challenges that refugees and others might face when they're seeking further education in the U.S., discuss some information needed for conducting credential evaluations, and then we'll talk about the challenges and then the best practices for admissions of people with unofficial or non-verifiable academic credentials. I think as the introduction, as Neela pointed out too, that we all have our own policies and when we deal with these different circumstances, but I think collaboration really and sharing of information is really most helpful in the current global environment that we have found ourselves. And, I think there are a million different ways we can help vulnerable populations and each other. So this is from our perspective at ECE and how we addressed the situation. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about ECE aid later on in the presentation. So with the introduction, this is just a little general background about the populations that are most vulnerable that we're serving. So many refugees are, of course, already in the U.S. and maybe as green card holders or maybe even full citizens after being here for a number of years. And I think that population really might get lost in the mix when they're seeking further education. And so a lot of these concepts that I'll cover today can apply to student visa holders as well. But in general, so we've welcomed over 3 million refugees since 1975 in the U.S. And many great things can be said of welcoming refugees to the U.S. They've added to the richness of our culture, contributed to economic strength, and reinforced our core values as a nation. From an admissions viewpoint and from our world of credential evaluation, I think it's extremely important with refugees and other vulnerable populations to remember that these are people. Sometimes when we're looking at a lot of paperwork and transcripts and diplomas, that might get lost. So I'm constantly, reminding myself and others that we're dealing with people who need some help. These statistics are from the UNHCR. They were published last year in June. I'm assuming they'll be in about a month. They'll have new statistics out and different numbers for this past year. But they're I think when I see these numbers, they're very daunting. But I do also try to keep in mind the ripple effect that our professions can have. We may not be able to help every single refugee, but helping 1 or 5 or 20 refugees or people who are in a vulnerable situation can have a huge impact, not only for the student but their entire family. With that in mind, according to the UNHCR, we're witnessing the highest levels of displacement on record. throughout the world. There's 65.6 million forcibly displaced people. Many of them are considered IDP or internally displaced people. Another statement they've put out is that nearly 20 people are forcibly displaced every minute as a result of conflict. And among these 65.6 million displaced people, 22.5 million are considered refugees, and over half of whom are under the age of 18. So it's a lot of children. For the host areas, I think the 2016 statistics, it's kind of telling sort of the trend of where people are trying to find safety. In 2016, these numbers for the host areas were a little bit different. The Middle East and North Africa were at 39% of hosting displaced refugees. Africa was at 29%, so a little bit of change there. But I think the biggest change is that Europe was in 2016 was only 6%, and they've jumped in a year to 17%. Americas were at 12, and now we're at 16, but it's clear that Europe has seen the greatest increase in refugees coming into their countries, and again, still coming into America. All right, so with that little background, we'll look at some challenges. And again, when we talk about challenges here, I'm discussing academic documentation challenges and a few policy challenges. Of course, there are a number of other life or death challenges that refugees are facing every day, but for the purposes of this discussion, we won't be covering those. So there's these three categories I have up here: undocumented, unavailable, and unverifiable. So undocumented students, we're not going into that. That's whether someone is legally residing in the U.S. It can refer to a lack of visas or the government documents like passports or social security cards, but we won't be discussing that. What we're really focusing on here is whether documents are unavailable or unverifiable. We can make a further distinction between those two. Unavailable documents refer to documents that might have been destroyed or are no longer accessible. Many refugees arrive with absolutely no paper records of educational achievements. In addition, education that was completed but never formally recorded could fall into this category. And it could be, school closings or mail strikes. There's a host of issues to make it hard for a student to have the documents that they need for academic purposes. Unverifiable documents can include documents that are questionable. They present you with some documents, but we're not quite sure if they are the correct documents. Perhaps the issuing institution cannot be contacted then for reasons of safety or political crises. And this would be considered, lack of access to documents that do exist. Or perhaps the documents don't meet your specific documentation criteria. ECE, we have a lot of, documentation requirements for specific countries. And so if we don't receive the documents we're asking for, there needs to be some way that we can verify them, that they're authentic. But other reasons for unverifiable documents could be that the institution closed, it's in an area of conflict, so you can't contact the school, or the institution can be contacted, but it would put the student or their family at risk, and we certainly don't want to do that. And then also, there might not be enough documents available to even verify. It might just be pieces of information. So, with all that's going on in the world, we still need to perform our tasks and practice our due diligence as admissions counselors or credential evaluators. My brain is always thinking about academic credential perspective, and I think with a better understanding of this and the challenges that people face, this is sort of part of how we can, better welcome students and refugees into U.S. higher education. So not every student has the same story. we're asking, how did you leave your country? How did you arrive here? And ultimately, what did you bring? Not everyone's stepping out of their home saying, okay, do I have that sealed copy of that transcript from 15 years ago? So some questions that we can ask, are these three on the left side of the screen. But here are some of them that we see often when faced with reviewing documents or the lack of documents. So there will be interrupted periods of education because, like I said before, institution closings, because of war or environmental disasters. We've seen, schools, even in the Philippines, there's a school that was destroyed by a volcano. And so we need to figure out how that the documents don't exist anymore. So that's quite a challenge to try to figure out, as evaluators. In other cases, the student might be unable to provide official proof of their educational achievements. So they don't have a diploma or their degree certificates or the transcripts for various reasons. Vietnam is a good example I like to use, where students are only given one high school diploma and one set of transcripts. And if they're lost, it's really, really difficult to get a replacement. You have to, go to the school and get a copy stamped off by the school. And if someone's already here and they can't go back, it's a difficult proposition to ask somebody to do. Third, maybe they may only have unofficial documents. So a student or an employment ID card or an instructor recommendation letter or employment qualification certificates, things like that, which we can't really verify through conventional means. They might give us a better picture of their educational background, but they might not be proving to us what their actual achievements were. And then finally, a student may have attended a refugee camp, which in most cases it's unlikely that we would recommend credit or something like that for it, because refugee camps in many cases, not all, but in many cases, would be considered something that would be unrecognized from our viewpoint. So what do you do when something like this happens? There's multiple governments issuing documents. Syria is a good example of that. There's two different kinds of documents being issued between the Ministry of Education and the proxy Ministry of Education. So there's, what documents do we want to see and what can we consider to be official? Ukraine and Crimea is another example, and it can be confusing for every party involved, the student included. So we look towards, ECE looks towards the country of origin's Ministry of Education in most cases, but we're aware that, a lot of other documents might be being issued, and it's up to us to figure out what's going on. What if the potential student had been stuck in a refugee camp, as I said before, and they don't have documents from their home country? Or what do you do when a student comes to you and has a transcript with only partial information on it? Can we maybe find other information online to help us? And in some cases, we can. And then what if your contact, say at the Ministry of Education in Vietnam, suddenly doesn't work there anymore? So what do you do then? And then on top of all of that, with the documentation challenges, we have our policy challenges, which can be, there have been policy challenges in the U.S. since the formation of this country. So these are issues that can add to the documentation challenges, whether it's local, state, or federal. I get confused by a lot of this stuff because I'm not a lawyer. I'm not really an expert on immigration law. And so, but there are good resources out there. And what I will say is that we know that, currently there is a lot of more additional vetting and stricter screening policies. I have attended some other sessions at NAFSA and various other conferences that have talked a lot about social media accounts for students, that students should be aware of what they put on their social media accounts. I think that goes for anybody, not just students. But there's a lot higher scrutiny and collection of information about things from family members and places of employment and things like that. And this is just ultimately slowing down the process. So between the documentation and the policy challenges, there's a lot of things to consider when we're doing our credential evaluations. So we have all these issues and problems and things we need to sift through. So how do we approach these and make better, better decisions? Well, first, and these best practices, again, are what sort of ECE, they're from our experiences and from our perspective. But these are sort of the steps that we like to follow with all of our applicants at ECE, not just somebody coming from a vulnerable situation. But if a potential student is missing anything or can't submit certain documents, this is sort of where we first piece the puzzle together. So we gather the resources at your disposal, collect the information to support the case. Supplemental documents could be those recommendation letters or employment qualifications. Anything that can help support the claims of the student or the applicant. And we like to see the whole picture of someone's educational history. So we always ask for that information. Even if something doesn't pertain to what they would like to pursue now, that educational history can form a better picture for us for evaluations. And then clarifying the status of any absent documents. Why don't you have something? If it doesn't put the student or the family in danger, can we verify something that might be questionable? If it's not accessible or no response, then we need to research if those records exist somewhere. So there's a lot of online databases specific to certain schools or to the Ministry of Education websites, or other examples would be like the University Grants Commission for India or Pakistan. They have been updating things on a pretty regular basis to verify which schools are operating and when they were approved by the Ministry of Education in their respective countries. But there's a lot of verification resources. You could find in specific schools, you could find a list of graduates. Sometimes you could find results online to sort of verify that the transcripts are correct or the mark sheets or whatever you're looking at. So things to remember about this is though that lists and results could be time limited. I know a lot of like India, for example, there's a lot of results for marks and things like that, but they might just be for last year. And so at the end in the resources, you'll see I mentioned the Wayback Machine. It is a pretty great tool online for evaluators to find resources that might not be current to the website. And I'll explain that in a minute. It'll make more sense at the end. But yeah, there's just a lot of online resources that you can use at your disposal that wouldn't necessarily put somebody at risk because it's just your IP address checking on things, online. The next thing we do after we sort of have the whole picture of what's going on is we want to verify the situation of the claims. So we can talk to other colleagues, we can talk to faculty, what is going on in this country or with this institution. I will plug ECE Connection because I think it's a really great, we have a message board, it's free to sign up for. Again, it will be in the resources, but it's a really great way to ask questions, what's going on here, and all of our evaluators are on there answering questions, but it's also just colleagues in general all over the world that if somebody else at a different school has seen a similar situation, they could verify something as far as, oh yeah, we tried this and it didn't work either, or oh, try this link. Maybe you can verify something online or something like that. And we also use a lot of Education USA advisors to just get a picture of what's going on at specific institutions or ministries in different countries all over the world. So it's good to get in touch with those people and yeah, help each other out. And then finally, for this little best practices section is we want to then compare those original documents. Whatever documents we've received, we want to, look through our archives. If you don't if you don't have an archive, you should start one. But I know space is always a consideration. But yeah, we want to compare signatures of the time period, seals and stamps and any security features on those documents. And then ECE, the other plug I'll say at the end here is that ECE connection also, for the paid subscribers, we do have a sample documents section now where we have over 1,000 sample documents from all around the world, and we add to it each week as part of our tasks as research evaluators to offer we scan a lot of documents here at ECE, and we redact them, and we can put them up then to sort of, people can use it as a resource to look at their documents and see if the formats are correct and various other, features on documents. The document forensics, as we like to say. Again, we want to remember this is a person that's associated with the application, and we want to, reconstruct their educational background, ask students what they have and why or why not, and then require proof of that status. If they're a refugee, we want to see, proof of that status. And then verify those situations and claims, and then thoroughly document that case for any exceptions, if you make exceptions, which we'll get into the next section here. But remember, we don't want to ask someone to get documents if it puts them at risk. And then with our policies, we want to be flexible, but we also want to still, safeguard our integrity and credibility as an organization. So we want to work with people to help them, but we also want to make sure that they can, that they're still, we're making it fair to everyone who is, applying for a credential evaluation. So what do you do if there are insufficient documents and you have all this information, but they're still missing pieces or missing documents? Do you make that exception, or do you cancel the process and say there's nothing we can do? If you make exceptions, these are sort of our suggestions and what ECE sort of follows. We have evaluator meetings every other week where the 30 evaluators, we all sit in a room and discuss difficult situations and figure out if we need to change policy with a certain school or a certain country. But these are sort of what we do. We review the current policy and, know your university organization's policies, obviously. But we review them and we see, is there a current policy in place that needs to be changed? We'll review whole countries anytime we get any feedback from students saying documents are difficult at this time that we're requesting. So we want to review those policies on a fairly regular basis, especially if we're hearing, pushback from our applicants or students. And then we want to consider maybe refining the appeal process. So this can differ for you between undergraduate and graduate admission policies. But, ultimately seek guidance and support from the provost or the chief academic officer, or registrar, or other faculty members. If it's necessary, you might need to augment your policy and obtain approval, of course. But again, then you can form committees to review and approve these kinds of cases that are difficult, and then obviously research the current situation and circumstances to gain that insight on the case and how it might impact ultimately the process and other policies. So again, we have these meetings at ECE that discuss these cases. There's a lot of discussions on policy and if we need to change them. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is be as consistent as possible so that the next student that comes down the line with similar issues, we treat them the same as we have in the past with other people. And then finally, for best practices, I have this little alternatives and solutions. So these are sort of endless. And, from ECE's perspective, we did our little thing, which is the next section on ECE. But for schools, as I've been working with ECE Aid throughout this past couple of years, every time I talk to another school or an organization, everybody's doing really unique, amazing things that have been helping out. So how can we help students who need that extra help? And so these are just a couple of examples. But granting provisional admission, based on, performance in an ESL course, for instance, or assisting with federal or state or local or private nonprofit grants, et cetera. You can increase online course options, which really helps incorporate refugee populations if they have access to the internet, or refugees who might have already been resettled. But yeah, that's a really great, I've seen that a lot of different, a variety of different online course options that are being offered. And then, supporting student organizations. So University of Michigan has Refugees to College. It's a student sort of led group with faculty as well. And there's another great example, I think, is the World University Service of Canada. They have a student refugee program fee program, which they sort of tack on extra money to, like it's a self-imposed student fee that students put upon themselves, and it ranges from 18 cents to $15, but that money then is collected and it's provided to then a refugee student to cover the cost of their tuition or housing. So I think the more of these kinds of initiatives that exist, the better, and to provide students with, it also helps then your students on campus, it gives them a sense of community and support regarding refugees that they're attending classes right alongside with. So this was our response at ECE, was ECE Aid. And it was done ultimately to support refugees. But as you'll see as we go through this, it sort of has grown, and we've had some really great success with it so far. But we conducted a survey in 2015 with around 1,500 higher education institutions and refugee resettlement agencies. And we asked what was the biggest barrier to refugees who needed a credential evaluation, whether for education or employment purposes. And honestly, I thought, a lot of us, I think, thought that documentation challenges would be the highest on the list, that it's always documents. But surprisingly, it wasn't necessarily that. There certainly are document issues, as we went through in the past couple of sections. But ultimately, it came down to cost, and that, credential evaluations, I think, sometimes are seen as sort of, it's a barrier. It's an extra thing that students have to pay for, or it's more hoops to have to jump through for admissions. And, obviously, we feel that the importance of credential evaluation is really, it is really important. But ultimately, and as a nonprofit, we keep our costs as low as we can, but it's still a barrier. So we began to consider a couple of things, and we'd been a nonprofit for since 1980, but we had never run any kind of fundraising campaign, and we'd never asked for donations. All of our services are fee-based, but we do receive requests from time to time for discounts on our services from individuals and things like that. So we decided, okay, if we raised funds through donations, this is where we could offer help to those who needed it. And so what we ultimately, and so essentially what the program is we offer fee waivers for our services, our credential evaluation services. But we can't obviously offer everybody a fee waiver. We do roughly 30,000 evaluations a year. So what we decided to do is we could start collecting donations and then put that money in a little pile on the side that would just be for these fee waivers. But we knew realistically we didn't have the capacity as an organization to verify, a person's background or their personal stories of, as a refugee, we couldn't check bank accounts and things like that, or passport information. We wanted to really focus on what we do best, which is credential evaluations. That's what we know how to do. And so we thought by allowing participating institutions and organizations do what they do best, which is honestly, already having all that information on their end, the passports, the bank accounts, things like that. We thought that the easiest way to do this would be we would start setting up these unofficial sort of partnerships. We call them participants. There's no formal partnership in writing. If anybody wants to get on board with the ECE initiative, they talk to us, and we get them on our list of trusted organizations or institutions. And so we started setting up these participating universities and colleges, resettlement agencies, and other nonprofits that generally deal with employment agencies. So the pilot program began in August of 2016, and we had one community college and one resettlement agency. It worked out well. All the initial donations came from our board of directors and staff, and by the end of 2016, we had only we'd granted 6 or 7 fee waivers. So it was a little slow at first, but it was working out how we wanted it to. But we really wanted, we started collecting more and more donations, which you'll see sort of in the next couple of slides how we have really increased our donations. But ultimately, what we did at the beginning of last year, 2017, is we sent out a call to all of our school contacts to see if anybody else wanted to be part of this. And so we did. We got a lot more people on board, and so then the recipients of the fee waivers really increased over the past year. So initially, the program was to help refugees, but as it's grown, we've sort of included other vulnerable populations that needed support. So it has grown now to people with who have, environmental disasters, natural disasters, TPS status, special immigrant status. One of our participants is, of course, Education USA. They have their Opportunity Funds program. So these are candidates, students who want to come to the U.S. for school, but they can't afford any of the upfront costs for application fees and things like that. So we've offered now, they're part of this too, that OFP candidates can get a fee waiver after we've talked, and verified through the advisors or the REACs who's sending us. But it's really been a really great growing experience of progressing along. We're still helping plenty of refugees and asylum seekers, but there's a couple other people that could use the help as well. So they've been included in sort of the ECE initiative. And of course, why? Well, officially and unofficially, of course, it opens the door to refugee education, professional fulfillment. It's pretty similar to why we do credential evaluations in the first place. And so, but I think honestly and personally, it just felt right for us at ECE to do. And we had been thinking about, ways to help people more. And this sort of is how it ended up, how we could help and provide assistance in our little corner of the sort of admissions world. Our board and staff have been really enthusiastic about it, and our webpage has a lot of inspiring stories. These are sort of the pictures in these slides. You can see some of our stories that we've gotten from the recipients. So I think it just makes all of us at ECE feel a lot more connected with current events and the people that we're serving. The donations, which is sort of the initial pilot program was based off of donations from staff and our board, but what we ended up doing is setting up, so we get, roughly we complete 30,000 applications a year, or 30,000 credentials a year. And so what we do now is, in sort of a pay it forward model, there's a section on our application for our paying applicants to tack on an extra 5, 10, 20, whatever they want, dollars to their application fee. So they're getting their evaluation from us, but they're given the option to pay it forward, so to speak, and give a little bit extra money to help people who couldn't afford our services for various reasons. So the average donation is around $6. But it is, as you can see from this little chart, it's the vast majority of donations are coming from our paying applicants. So it's very heartwarming, and it also makes us feel, again, more connected with our applicants. But we do continue to come up with other fundraising ideas, and to more equally distribute our sources of donations. But this year we're looking at grant options and other business partner donations. So successes for us have been that the first half year we had done 6 or 7 reports, but now we've in only 2 participating institutions. Now we have 30 participating institutions and organizations, and we've provided over 100 fee waivers to recipients. So it really jumped last year, and it's really increased this year as well. I mean, we're on track for quite a few more fee waivers this year. Right now we have about 50 actually recipients who are pending, so we're waiting for documents essentially to complete their reports. But it's really, we've gotten a lot of positive feedback, and as I mentioned before, we have an ECE AIDS story page, and we expect that this trend will continue this year and beyond. Okay, so I can finish up with just a few resources here. I know there's a lot of stuff out there. But essentially, this is my sort of positive mental attitude PMA here, that there's a lot going on around the world, and we can find a lot of those resources just by Googling, or as you'll see in the next couple slides, with ECE and IIE, there's a lot of resources that we can find. Again, just a couple that I'll mention would be Refugees College is a great thing that's happening at University of Michigan, which is this team of students and professionals that they developed to help develop these action plans for refugees and their families. Upwardly Global is another nonprofit that we've worked a lot with. They're based out of a couple of different cities, but we work with the Chicago branch because we're in Milwaukee, so we're working with the branch that's close to us. But they do a lot of employment things for refugees and immigrants, and it's something that we hadn't really considered as credential evaluators, but to look more at the workforce. But yeah, it's a great, it's a unique model that they've set up. It doesn't necessarily fit into a typical resettlement agency model, so it was a really great collaboration that we've sort of come up with them. There's other things out there that aren't necessarily like fee waivers or things, but Article 26 backpack is a thing that's been coming up more recently, which is sort of that virtual backpack cloud technology of storing refugees' documents for further use on a cloud. So that, I think things like that picking up would be really important. And I'll always plug the connection. This is some screenshots. Again, it's free to sign up, and then you can use the message board for free. There's no charge for that. There are other paid resources if you upgrade, but ultimately the free portion is the message board, which you can then ask questions about credentials or institutions. Again, all of our evaluators are on there, and we check it on a daily basis to see if anything new has come up. But it is also for colleagues across the world, other admissions counselors and people like that who are like you, who could answer questions too if you know the answer. And then here's our ECE Aid page. Again, there's a stories section. There's a participating institution section. So if anybody's interested in becoming a participant of the initiative, you can just email me, or there's a form you can fill out on the participating institutions page that will get sent to me essentially, and then I can contact you if you have any questions. Of course, IIE PEER has their really great resources page with other initiatives that are going on. I highlighted this article on IIE, the Supporting Displaced and Refugee Students in Higher Education. They have a lot of great principles and best practice suggestions on there. Enoch Narek has this really good resource, it's called Recognized Qualifications Held by Refugees. So it's a guide for credential evaluators. A lot of stuff, that I talked about today might be on here that or similar ideas and guidelines. It's a really good sort of guidebook to credential evaluations for refugees. and then I mentioned the Wayback Machine. So this is what it looks like. I don't know if anybody has used it. We tend to use it a lot as evaluators at ECE. So if there's, web pages change a lot, but what they have done, they're a nonprofit. They basically they archive old web pages. So they've been archiving web pages since, I don't know, the 90s. And so there's billions, as you can see, 327 billion web pages saved over time. So for instance, if I need to look up if there was a school, for instance, that was recognized possibly by the University Grants Commission in India, and it was in the 2000, and now the school does not exist anymore. So somebody came with documents from a school that does not exist anymore, and so it's no longer on the current web page for like the UGC. I could put in the URL of the UGC and basically a calendar comes up from all of the shots that they've saved from that web page over time. So I could possibly go back and see what their website looked like in 2000 on a specific date in a month, and maybe find that school and say, oh yes, it was recognized. There's no way to find out right now because the current web page doesn't list the school anymore. So the Wayback Machine it's a weird thing to sort of wrap your head around, but yes, the internet doesn't go away really. Pages don't go away actually. You can find them, and this is a really great tool that we use a lot to see if something exists that doesn't exist any longer on the internet. But again, I'd like to thank you, and this is all my contact information, and I'd again like to thank IIE PEER and Neela and just all the great work that they're doing over there. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to you can chat them or just send me questions to my email address at any time. I can talk forever on this stuff. So thanks again. I'll hand it over to Neela.
We have one question that asks, how can students access ECE aid services? And during your presentation, you talked a little bit about how you can become a partner of ECE aid. So maybe you can expand on, maybe
Sure.
students applying directly versus universities becoming a
Sure.
partner.
Yes. Okay. So that's a really good question, and it's important because so individuals cannot they cannot get a fee waiver through us directly. They need to work through one of our partner or participating institutions or organizations. And so I encourage, if students or if a couple of students are wanting to try to get a fee waiver because they do have these suggested guidelines that we've given to our participants, like refugee status or just extreme financial hardship, that they should encourage their institution that they're applying to then talk to me so we can get the institution on board with the initiative. So we don't give out the fee waivers to individuals, essentially. What we need to do is have one of the participating institutions or organizations contact us and say, this student needs a fee waiver. And because what we're doing is we're relying on those organizations or schools to say, yes, this person indeed cannot afford the service because of X, Y, Z. Because again, ECE, we don't really have the capacity to verify all of those claims. All we have the capacity to do is the credential evaluation portion of it. So that again is what I would suggest to individuals. And signing up with us is very easy. There's no commitment, essentially. We have actually quite a few participants who they don't send us anybody. They just are sort of behind the initiative and feel in the future if they have a student that would fit under those guidelines of refugee status or something like that they could then use the initiative for a fee waiver for one of their students. We have some participants who send a lot, and then there's some that don't send us any. So if you're interested in, becoming part of the initiative, it's not a formalized partnership. It's just saying, yes, and it's basically us saying, okay, we know who you are, and so we have a contact person at your school who can then send me essentially a name and a date of birth, and then we can get the process going to give them the fee waiver. So we want the participants to basically verify the claims of the student that they can't afford the service, our services, and then forward that information to us. And that's a long way to explain that, but I hope that makes sense.
Well, it does to me, and I think I have a follow-up question on
Okay.
that one, and I guess I imagine it should be a quick response. So the question is, could a resettlement agency be the participating organization?
Absolutely. So yes, there's a couple of resettlement agencies that we work with, and so they'll send us the name and the date of birth, and then we go from there and give the fee waiver. So yes, we have both institutions and resettlement agencies, and essentially, I think what some resettlement agencies have done, because obviously they're not, somebody is not applying to the resettlement agency for school. So what they'll do is the resettlement agency sends us the information. We give them the fee waiver, the student the fee waiver, and then they're going to use our report then to apply to whatever school they want.
Mm-hmm. Great. We have 5 more minutes, so I do have another question. It's a little longer. So, is there a resource that helps interpret scores in a specific country's educational certificate? For example, for the Syrian baccalaureate, according to WES, 70 to 100 is an A, 60 to 70 a B, and so on. However, in the Western context, a score of 75 might seem like a poor grade. And the question is, where can I find info on the distribution of grades, scores, and the median score? So I guess the question is, while, for example, in the Syrian context, a 75 is a good grade, it might seem that it's not in the U.S. context, and if there's if ECA has any guidance on how to evaluate those different scores depending on the country context.
Okay, so I don't work as an evaluator. I don't work with Syria, so I couldn't give you an answer off the top of my head of why. And ECA aid essentially is just giving the fee waivers. We're not sort of setting any of the policies or guidelines of what we do as credential evaluators at ECE. My suggestion would be to get onto the connection and post that question to the ECE, to all of our evaluators, because the people who work with Syria they would have an actual answer. And so I don't know how I could answer that because I don't work with Syrian credentials. But yeah, as far as a resource, I don't know off the top of my head. I could certainly get back to somebody on that after this. If you want to send me that question as an email, I can certainly dig around and find an answer for you. Otherwise, again, if you post onto the message board on the connection, one of our evaluators could answer it and maybe guide you to an actual resource. We do also, part of the connection, we do have by country resources that we use that are, online resources of where we would look for a specific country for answers. It depends on the country. Some of them, there's one resource, other online. Others, there might be, 10 resources that we can look for, guidance on recognition or grading scales, etc. So, I would say email me a question specifically about that, and I can ask some people around the office here, or post it publicly to the message board on the connection.
Great, thank you. There is another question. Does ECA keep credential reports for a determined length of time?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
I guess that once you did an evaluation, that's how I understand it. Maybe I'm wrong. So once you did an evaluation, do you keep that evaluation on file for on your end for a specific time?
So the ECA aid evaluations are there's no difference between our regular evaluations at ECE and the ECE8 evaluations. You can't even tell the difference. It's the exact same service and product that the student gets in the end with the evaluation report. And we keep those on file for, I believe, 10 years. So you can order copies. You get like the general policy at ECE is we complete the evaluation report. You have a year then to contact us if there's any mistakes or like questions about it. And then after that year, it's sort of locked, but you still have the availability to, because you basically create an ECE account online that you can log into, and so that report will be in that account for 10 years, and the student can order copies of it for 10 years. It'll be on file.
Thank you, Zach. And we just have one final question. That's all I can see right now, which is, does ECE8 cover fees for taking English certification tests such as TOEFL or the IELTS?
No, it is only a fee waiver for ECE services. So it would be an evaluation, a credential evaluation. Whatever our services are for, which is a credential evaluation, that's what the fee covers, the fee waiver covers.
Great. Thank you very much for all of that information. I think I can just reiterate, if you have any questions regarding PEER, you can always reach out to myself here at PEER. If you have questions for Zach, you can see his email address. Zach, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about ECE credential evaluation and specifically also about ECE8 today. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I hope everyone who is on the line has a wonderful weekend. And we hope that this was really informative for you. And I do hope that you take Zach up on the opportunity to reach out to him and learn more about the ECE8 initiative. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.